Shalom everybody from the great nation of Israel, and greetings VFI news supporters and anybody else watching this video. Now I'm filming this on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, as I'm getting ready to celebrate it with my family for a happy new year here in Israel and all around the world. I have to apologize if it's a bit rough. As you know and might have heard, we had a difficult night last night because Iran fired 181 ballistic missiles at our small country, sending almost the entire population into bomb shelters. That included the VFI news team, who subsequently had to rewrite the entire report for today, and that took most of the night. I was also up very late managing the situation here at the Millennium Center in Modi'in, the home of Vision for Israel, just outside of Jerusalem, heading towards Tel Aviv. And even though I had a few cups of coffee already this morning, I still might not be at my best. So I hope you can have some grace for me. There was also a terrorist shooting attack in Jaffa shortly before the missiles started coming in, and it all follows the IDF's ground incursion into southern Lebanon. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Well, there's been a lot that's happened in the last week, but I'm going to pick up where I left off after my last emergency update video, which I recorded a few days ago because of the very big news of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah's removal from the stage. Now, if you watched that video, you know I also warned about the damage to Israel's economy because of the credit rating downgrade by the Moody's agency. I'm sorry to have to tell you that the economic bad news has kept coming in since then. I've said it many times over the past year, and I'll say it again now. Israel is going to need all the financial assistance we can get from our friends around the world to help us recover from this time of war. If you want to make a contribution to that effort, please visit our website at visionforisrael.com and click on the Projects tab. There you'll see different ways you can make a donation to some of the many needs we're helping to meet here in the land of Israel, including providing bomb safety shelters, which I'm sure many of the shelters were already in use last night. We're also providing training and equipment for medical first responders, firefighting crews, volunteer and security teams, and much more. Last but certainly not least, we're providing food and household goods, as well as life's basic necessities and other forms of assistance to many families in financial distress all over Israel. Now, once again, that's visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. Well, even as we were all processing the news of Nasrallah's demise, we watched in amazement as the Air Force and artillery continued to hit Hezbollah targets. This included rocket launchers, which, as I've said before, are even more important than the rockets themselves, thousands of which have also been destroyed during these attacks. But perhaps even more important than the launchers and the rockets were the senior, mid-level, and even junior field commanders and terror operatives that Hezbollah has lost. I won't give you all the names of all the top Hezbollah guys who departed this earth over the past few days. I can't even pronounce most of those names, so it would be awkward if I tried to. The point is that they're no longer in the picture. All of the training and experience these guys had is lost to Hezbollah, and the world is a better place because of that. Israel is much safer because of that, and this includes the IDF troops who will now have to push Hezbollah's surviving ground forces back away from the northern border. I'll get back to that point in a moment, but first I have to tell you all about another amazing operation carried out by the Israeli Air Force on Sunday, sending dozens of jets almost 2,000 kilometers south to hit the Houthis in Yemen. This strike on the strategic assets included the port facilities in Hodeidah and Ras Isa. Oil storage and refining infrastructure was set ablaze by these strikes, and many other buildings in other parts of the port were severely damaged. These targets carried real military and strategic value, but they also contained a warning for Iran. The oil fields and export terminals Iran depends on for its own economy are actually closer to Israeli air bases than Hodeidah and Ras Isa are. By launching this strike so far away and deliberately posting video of the strike aircraft being refueled in midair by tanker planes and then hitting oil storage tanks, Israel was sending a strong message to Iran that their own oil fields are within range of the Israeli Air Force. I hope so. This message was sent to Iran in the hopes that it would deter the Ayatollah regime from hitting Israel, as they've been loudly threatening to do so for several months now, and even more so since its death of Nasrallah. Alas, they didn't get the message, and here we are. Now put a pin in that for a moment while I tell you about the other big story to come out of the last few days. That, of course, would be the IDF ground incursion into southern Lebanon. It's been an open secret for the last several months that the IDF was sending commandos and special forces units on a scouting mission into Lebanon to try and find tunnel entrances, paint targets for airstrikes, gather intelligence, and otherwise prepare for a large-scale ground offensive. Sounds like what my father did during World War II. Now, on Monday, a report about this activity appeared in the Wall Street Journal news portal, which is unusual because these sorts of things usually don't get reported in the media much. But this time it was, and some analysts speculated that this wasn't an accident. Rather, this was done deliberately in order to put the general public on alert that something was up. Then came the difficult to conceal call-ups of reservists. Many of these citizen soldiers have already fought in Gaza, sometimes having been called up more than once for tours of duty that lasted months. Now they're getting called up again for the battle against Hezbollah. Large numbers of troops, tanks, and support vehicles of every kind were observed and being moved up to the northern border, and reports began emerging that all pointed to a ground incursion being imminent. Then, all of a sudden, on Monday afternoon, a United States official quietly told the media that Israel had informed the United States that it would be sending tanks and troops across the border in the next few days, or maybe even in the next few hours. It ended up being the latter, as large units began crossing the border into southern Lebanon just before midnight on Monday. By the middle of Tuesday afternoon, they were reporting that they'd taken some of their initial objectives and encountered few Hezbollah terrorists. Most of them had run away, and they left behind stocks of weapons and equipment, including rockets and anti-tank missiles, which the IDF promptly captured. Bunch of chickens they are. Before we talk about the events of Tuesday evening, I have to make a few comments about all this. Hezbollah began firing missiles and rockets into Israel on October 8, 2023, the day after the Hamas massacre in the Israeli communities close to the Gaza border. They kept up a steady stream of rockets and missiles, UAVs, and anti-tank missiles, forcing tens of thousands of residents of northern communities to evacuate. These strikes also killed 24 Israeli civilians and soldiers, destroyed dozens of homes, schools, shops, and other buildings, and last but not least, started fires that destroyed over 37,000 acres of farmland and wooded areas, not to mention about 70,000 Israelis being evacuated, Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis and Druze Israelis. During all that time, Israel struck back at Hezbollah at roughly the same intensity, launching air and artillery attacks at Hezbollah positions along the border and also launching airstrikes at strategic targets deeper inside Lebanon. Now, this included targeted assassinations of around 350 senior Hezbollah operatives and field commanders. Hezbollah said they were harassing Israel and tying down large numbers of IDF troops in the north in order to support Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The Houthis in Yemen also gave this as a reason for why they were firing at Israel. But in the last 2 weeks, Israel reminded both Hezbollah and Yemen that you should never pull the dog's tail if you don't have a plan for dealing with his teeth. They have both howled in protest at the harsh blows they have suffered, saying that they've never wanted a war with Israel, but they were just doing something that some might call virtue signaling by firing a few rockets, drones, missiles, etc. at Israeli cities. They weren't looking for trouble, so they say. Well, now they've got real trouble, and they have only themselves to blame. I also have to make a comment about all the friendly advice that we're getting from some European governments that we should agree to a ceasefire in Gaza on the terms Hamas is offering. This would, according to these governments, compel Hezbollah and the Houthis to stop their attacks against Israel, and we could all get along kissing and hugging one another just like we did before, or never did. I've traveled extensively in Europe, and I have many good friends in these countries. I've learned a few things about the culture there in my travels, and that includes some very sad things. The experience of having 2 world wars fought in Europe in the first half of the 20th century was deeply traumatizing for these people, and it led many of them to the conclusion that there is no such thing as winning a war. Even if there's a military victory over an opponent, the damage to everyone involved is so great that the real enemy is war itself. Therefore, war must be avoided at all costs, even if it means surrendering to a brutal, evil, wicked terrorist regime. Living with the threat or even under the yoke of such a regime is preferable to fighting a war to destroy it, because in this narrative, there's no way to fight and destroy an enemy without suffering catastrophic damage yourself. Needless to say, Israel doesn't buy this narrative. A handful of other countries in what we once called the free world also don't buy it, including the United States, Finland, Britain, and France most of the time, and a few others depending on the circumstances. But most of the time, the spirit of weakness, surrender, and appeasement is a defining characteristic of Western humanistic countries today. That's not the only reason so many Europeans are so unsympathetic to Israel today, but it's one of the more consequential reasons. It might be a bit of a generalization to say that Europeans don't believe courage and heroism are virtues to cultivate anymore. It might be an exaggeration to say that there's a spirit of self-loathing and even suicide in Europe today. But I don't think it's much of a generalization or exaggeration to say so, and I worry a lot as I look at America and see these attitudes becoming more commonplace there. It's something else to pray about in case you don't have enough to pray about already. And don't forget, if you're American, United States citizens, you must vote in November. That's your duty. You get the government you vote for. Now, all of this leads us to the events on Tuesday afternoon, starting with a terrorist mass shooting attack in Jaffa. It started near a light rail station when 2 armed men entered the train after they visited a local mosque and began shooting at anyone they saw, including children. Just imagine being on a train in motion and not being able to run away from a shooter. There's no place to run to, and those trains are usually packed full of people, so every bullet fired into a crowd is guaranteed to hit at least one person and maybe many more, and of course all the wounded. That's what happened in Jaffa, and the shooters, who police later said were not Israeli citizens, would be shot dead by security teams and nearby police officers. They had already killed 7 people and wounded 17 others, including a child. As I'm filming this video, it's still unknown if these shooters were lone wolves, agents of Iran, or some other hostile power, or maybe members of an organized terrorist organization. What we do know is that they carried out a successful terror attack in the heart of one of Israel's largest cities, and they probably won't be the last ones to try doing something like this. There are literally thousands of illegal weapons in Israel. And I have long said and believed that God's hand of protection is the only reason there aren't more such terror attacks here. That brings us to last night's missile attack from Iran, which miraculously didn't cause much damage. Only one person was killed, a Palestinian worker from Gaza who got hit by some shrapnel from an intercontinental rocket that fell on him in the city of Jericho, south of Jerusalem. A handful of Israelis were also hurt by shrapnel, and several others hurt themselves falling or twisting their ankle as they tried to run to a bomb shelter. That's something you always need to be careful about in a stressful situation. By the way, I was stuck on the highway. People were ducking down on the ground. In the middle of the highway, traffic was backed up for kilometers. Now, speaking of taking cover and safety bomb shelters, Vision for Israel has placed nearly 400 bomb safety shelters in communities all over Israel, and I'm sure many of them were used last night for their intended purpose. When rockets and missiles are being intercepted overhead, the warhead might explode in the air and not on the ground, and that's a good thing as it causes less damage on the ground. But even in the best case scenario, the shrapnel and debris from the interception still falls to the ground and can cause severe damage and, of course, wound many others. There was quite a few videos posted to social media of this, and there were also reports that a few missiles got through the defenses, landed and exploded in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. So friends, these bomb safety shelters that we're giving to all these communities are very important. And in light of what's just happened, I'm asking you to help us place even more of these shelters. You can find out how by visiting visionforisrael.com and clicking on the Projects tab. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for the newsletter and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Now to make a brief comment on the attack last night. Iran had been threatening for months to punish Israel for assassinating so many senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders, along with a fair number of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officers, including a few generals. One of the sadly amusing things about all this is that they have declared it to be a violation of international law for Israel to extrajudicially execute their officers. I guess they're forgetting that they sent these guys to participate in an active war against Israel, and in a war, the soldiers of one side try to kill the soldiers of the other side. Those IRGC generals were in uniform in an active combat zone that was active because of a war their proxy terror group started, and they were a legitimate target under the laws of international law, to say nothing of the law of common sense. Iran's attack last night, on the other hand, is a gross violation of international law, and it was widely condemned as much by the United States, European Union, and several Western governments. Some of those condemnations were quite colorful, especially from Holland's Geert Wilders. This is a good place to mention that the United States helped shoot down some of the incoming missiles. According to a Pentagon statement, 2 American destroyers fired a dozen interceptors at incoming Iranian missiles as they flew in the airspace over Jordan. I think we should also thank Jordan for giving the United States permission to do this, as it could have denied access to its airspace. Israel has vowed that it will respond forcefully to this attack, and that response could come at any moment. It might have already happened by the time we post this video, but we're waiting, and I'm sure Israel is planning. Now, we're almost out of time for this video, and I want to continue the tradition of ending with some good news. The good news is that this evening, Israelis will celebrate Rosh Hashanah, also known as Yom HaTruah, the Feast of Trumpets. We blow shofars, dip apples in honey to signify our hopes for a sweet new year, and so I'm going to do some apples and honey right now to help you see what it's all about for those who are new in this tradition. Now, I want to bring you some good news. The good news is that this evening, Israelis will celebrate Rosh Hashanah, also known as Yom HaTruah, the Feast of Trumpets. We will be celebrating over the next couple days, and we blow shofars, we dip apples in honey to signify our hopes for a sweet new year. So I'm going to dip this apple in honey right now to help you see what it's all about for those who are new to this tradition. And we pray the following: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'etz. Blessed are you, God, ruler of the universe, who creates fruit of the tree. And so there's one for you and one for me. Yehi ratzon lefanecha, Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu, שתתחדש עלינו שנה טובה ומתוקה May it be your will, Adonai our God, to grant us a good and sweet year. God bless you and shalom as we celebrate the feasts of the Lord this autumn season.